Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each week we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today we are talking about The Virgin Suicides, the 1999 film written and directed by Sofia Coppola, based on The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
We're here in week 4 of our Auteur Autumn Fall season. Last week, we talked about Killers of the Flower Moon over on Patreon, so that rounded out our Scorsese back-to-back. And now we're diving into Sofia Coppola. So today we're talking about The Virgin Suicides, and next week we'll be talking about Priscilla, her new film coming out. And I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I want to hear a lot about this movie, because this was my first time watching this movie. I want to know, so watching this movie, I feel like watching it in 1999 as a younger person must have been a crazy trip. I think I would have absolutely been obsessed with this movie. I really liked it watching it now, but it made me wish I had seen it earlier in life, and I'm sad that I hadn't. But yeah, so watching this for the first time, I really didn't know what to expect, and I'm still kind of like trying to even parse what like happened to me. Like it feels like this movie just kind of like washes over you. It's sort of this kind of like melancholic dream state that you enter into, and like all of my analytical, I'm tracking plot and structure and like dramatic questions just kind of like dissipated into the ether, and I was just in this world. And I haven't seen a ton of Sofia Coppola films, but Lost in Translation also has that kind of effect on me, where I'm just become lost in this like poem of an experience almost. I want to talk about this because I feel like I need more thoughts in my brain to kind of calibrate and triangulate things, but there's definitely a lot of stylistic choices that were interesting. At times it's sort of documentary feeling, like very like we are interviewing this person, and you can feel that there's a documentarian off to the side, but in other times it's not like that at all. We also talked about recently Dazed and Confused, which I hadn't really seen. That came to mind. This feels of the same ilk, but kind of more like emotional in interesting ways that resonated with me. So yeah, this is just a really interesting film, and I'm sad I didn't see it earlier, but I'm really glad that I saw it for this. I want to hear from someone who saw it back in the day. So I'm going to start with Trisha. I think probably is your safe bet with that one.
I might have seen it earlier than you guys. I probably caught it right after Lost in Translation came out, because I wanted to go back and catch up on it. And I really enjoyed it then. I mean, it's so, I don't know, it lingers with you, right? It just kind of follows you around. And I felt it was, especially at the time, it was a portrayal of like young womanhood that I hadn't really seen before. But I also think the POV of it is incredibly interesting, because it's like about these young women, but it's not from their POV at all. There's a lot of missing information that we do not have. And it's because there are these male narrators. It's just Giovanni Ribisi. But,
Right.
there's...
It took me forever to like figure out who that was too. I thought it was Jason Schwartzman, but that didn't quite. Anyway, that was fun.
I mean, both are very solid, good guesses for a Sofia Coppola film or any Coppola film. But I don't know. There's this POV thing that's happening where it feels like it's almost not about them. It's almost about us looking at them and the way that they're like seen from the outside. And but I still felt that there was this like really salient insight that Sofia Coppola was showing. And I admit that I have not read the novel, and I'd love to hear from people who have. But as a piece of writing in and of itself, I think this film is incredibly gorgeous. And I really, really love it. And I'm like, it'd been a while, several years now since I had revisited it, and I just loved it again. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like a really fun watch, but it is surprisingly funny. Mm-hmm. And it's really tight and very compelling for essentially being, this sort of trance-like drama. I've talked about Picnic at Hanging Rock, which is something I really love. And this is also very Picnic at Hanging Rock adjacent, where it's just sort of about a mood and that sort of captures the subjects of it. Like, it captures the subjects of its gaze with this sort of mood-like portrait. It's lovely. I just really, really like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, so Brian, what about you?
I did see it back within a couple years after it came out. And honestly, I have no memory of my experience watching it, which means it wasn't super bad or super good. Like, it was just like I saw the movie and that was it. So it was basically like a first watch for me this time. And yeah, really, really fascinating. Everything you guys were saying about just that sort of that mood that washes over you and then like lingers with you. And as I was watching the movie, I was spending a lot of time trying to sort of parse the metaphor of it all, which I want to get into a ton, and was maybe struggling a little bit with it. So I think my experience of watching it, it's almost like watching a whodunit where you're spending too much time in your own head trying to figure things out rather than watching the movie. It's like it's a why done it, I guess. And then, so, I still enjoyed the experience, but then, Trisha, you said it lingers. Like, I watched it 2 days ago and it has kind of haunted me since then. Like, it's just stuck with me in like this really, really cool way, this like really exciting way where now it makes me want to go back and watch it like immediately. I want to get into all of that. But I think that there's a lot of cool stuff happening sort of within the movie in terms of just like the movie stuff that it's doing. But then there's also this bigger esoteric kind of what do movies do to us kind of thing that's going on that I think is really cool about this movie and Lost in Translation. Like there are, I was thinking like if Scorsese is, putting Rolling Stones videos in his movies, like Sofia Coppola is putting like Portishead videos in a movie, it's just like, if he's like, look at this guy, he's going to walk into a bar in slow motion and we're going to like watch him for, this is just like, no, we're just going to like watch people just exist. And then the music is going to just like drip emotion, like that, just like Honey montage at the end of Lost in Translation, right? Like there's just something really cool about the way that this movie and a lot of her movies just feel in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay. And Alex, what about you?
I think I saw it around the same time as Brian, which was, not that long after it came out. And I think I was just too young and, wasn't ready for a movie that didn't have that kind of clear plot conclusion at the end. I didn't get the point of it at the time, which is not to have conclusiveness about the why done it, who done it of it all. It is this tone poem experience. And I'm so happy to have had an excuse to watch it again for the podcast because I really loved it this time. And I think, Sofia Coppola, when I think about my favorite movie of hers, The Beguiled, both of these movies kind of, I don't know, that they just explore this mysterious world of women, like it's like just like these like all women spaces, and kind of like a certain kind of magic and mystery around those spaces. And there's just something really special about the way that she captures that, whatever that is. And in this instance, it's this young womanhood, coming of age kind of headspace, and confined in the house because of the overbearing mother. And then you've got in The Beguiled this kind of also coming of age, bubbling sexuality in a confined space with like a man entering that space. So I love the mastery she has over creating those spaces and playing with a really subtle, like kind of you can't put words to the kind of like feelings and emotions of that space, but movies can. And so, I would love to talk more about whatever that is, but I loved this movie. And I also agree with you, Trisha. I think it's so brilliant how the perspective is outside looking in at that space in this movie, where we don't understand all the why, or the girls kind of remain inscrutable to us through the end. And that's just part of that magic and mystery, which I really loved.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, let's get into it. I mean, so yeah, like we said, it's really interesting perspective things. There's this way that this film seems to kind of, I like your word, Brian, like haunted all of us. And so like how and why can movies do that? And yeah, the mystery and magic of women. We'll dive into that and answer that too.
What are they?
What are they?
So inscrutable.
Exactly.
But like, yeah.
The man on the podcast saying.
But I do think, yeah, there is something, you know, as we're talking about auteurs, part of what makes an auteur is, you know, there's, if film is a language, I feel like auteurs kind of develop their own dialect in a way.
Ooh,
and I feel like Sofia Coppola, even though I haven't seen that many of her films, seems to have her own dialect. Like when someone says there's a new Sofia Coppola, like I get a feeling of what that is. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dive in and kind of tease this apart a little bit.
Well, in our last conversation about Killers of the Flower Moon, we spent a little bit of time talking about how the filmmaker draws attention to things. And I think in this case in particular, because it's about a coming of age story, the way that the filmmaking pays attention to certain details makes you, like, puts you in the headspace of the way that people, like teenagers, pay attention to things, right? And so it's like when you're 16 and you have a crush on this guy, then like the minute details of like how he sits next to you in class, or like, you know, exactly how he like brushes your hand. Or I'm thinking of the scene where Trip Fontaine, Josh Hartnett's character,
On October 3rd. Okay, sorry.
yeah, correct. But yeah, where he's like sitting next to her in the movie, right? And their like hands are brushing on the armrest between them. All of those small details we tend not to weight them in adulthood the same way we do in childhood, right? Or like in adolescence.
Right.
So it's like, it's perfectly reasonable to me that Cecilia would have written is her name Cecilia, the youngest one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Cecilia would have written in her journal, oh, you know, I noticed this thing about the birds singing, or Lux did this, or my older sister did this. And the way that adolescent minds fixate on things or notice small things, and also think to like record them and treasure them, right? When you're a kid or an adolescent, you put little things in your treasure boxes, and it's just like a cool rock you picked up, right? But it's just like, I'm going to fixate on this thing because it was important to me. You know, when you're in your first relationship, you save all your movie ticket stubs from like the movie that you went to, or the song just means so much to you, of the song that you were listening to that one time during that one thing when they said that thing. And the filmmaking captures that, right? The way that details seem really vivid and the way that they stay with you. And I think that that's a big part of putting you in the headspace of the adolescent subjects, both the boys across the street who are the neighborhood boys who are observing them, and then the girls themselves, the Lisbon girls themselves. I think it's just brilliant observation at the end of the day.
I love when the boys are looking through kind of like the stolen scrapbooks and the like visual montage that happens. That something is so perfect about that. Like it captures that teenage imagination and them almost like luxuriating in this fantasy of, you know, being with these girls and these magical, you know, trips to Europe or whatever they're imagining. But I thought Sofia Coppola, like you're saying, Trisha, through her filmmaking, captures this teenage feeling really, really well.
And the fact that, you know, on top of the fact that sort of the girls are the essentially protagonists of the movie, you know, specifically Lux. And then we have the POV of the boys, but then we also have the Trip present day, you know, narration and stuff.
My boy, Michael Pare.
Yeah, there you go.
I've written like 3 movies for him now, and then I was like, oh, my buddy.
I love that. You know, the fact that we are seeing these events through each of their perspectives. So, Trip is presented as this like, oh, he's the it boy, like he can do anything, da da da, and then we cut to him being like, I like this girl and I don't know what to do, and it's just, or like him in the future, being sort of, obviously not proud of his actions and stuff, and I think that like that also helps imbue every moment with weight. The fact that we are seeing multiple characters who like want a thing to happen. So it's not just like, oh, this guy's going to come over and he's going to kiss me and she's excited about it. It's like, no, they're both kind of going like, what is going to happen? I want that, da da da. So then when their hands are almost touching, then you're in both of their heads at the same time going, oh, they both want this, but maybe the other one's not ready to do that, da da da. The scene where the other boy is up in Lex's like room and she comes in to get something and she's been like playing footsie with him, but then she's like, get out of my room, please. And it's just sort of these moments where it's just like, oh yeah, that all feels very, very real. Those little moments that you remember where you're like, oh man, maybe that was the moment where like this thing could have happened, or maybe I should have done that instead of this. We all stew on those until we die. So
Brian is still stewing.
Yeah, it's sort of a non sequitur. But Trisha, you're talking about like, that one song that was playing at the one thing. Maybe I've mentioned this on the podcast, but like when I broke up with my first girlfriend, I burned a CD of Coldplay's The Scientist with just that track, and I played it in the car while we broke up on a repeat.
Wow.
Wait, you played it like as the background music while like you were telling her you were breaking up with
this horrific thing I'm youth. Wow. Anyway, but like those,
I hope you told her you were sorry.
This is it. This is the apology right now.
Yes, definitely lots of apologies. But like these are things that wouldn't have come into my brain had we not been talking about like this movie. Had I not seen this movie, had that not transported me back to this time period in that head state. And like you're saying, Trisha, yeah, those like all those little details. Really like, yeah, it's so simple, but it's something that's, because it's so simple, we overlook it so easily as adults, as you were saying. And then also, yeah, we're talking about kind of perspective. And so there's the boys and from the different time jumps, but also there's this kind of interesting thing with the neighbors, where sometimes we're with the neighbors listening to the gossip about what's happening. And then there's, the reporters doing the story about what's been going on. And so again, none of that like coalesced into like a really clear thing that I could put my like hands on and wield, but it did create this like sense of I don't know, like it's about what people think or project, and it was just, I don't know, what do you guys make of all of that stuff?
I mean, something you're talking about all these different perspectives, and I think the movie felt very, for being such a subjective feeling movie, it also feels very objective and non-judgmental, not really taking a perspective or point of view, but really just, even the way that it's narrated in some ways, it just almost feels like it's laying out the facts and just presenting everything matter of factly. And even when we jump to adult Trip Fontaine, there's this kind of like simple objectivity of looking at him, and then this woman comes in and says, it's time for your group meeting. So he's probably like in rehab or something. Mm-hmm. But the movie is not like making a thing out of it. It's just like matter of fact, this guy ended up here. and that's what it is. And there's something interesting about that.
Yeah, I mean, the narrator is not a major character in the movie in a way that we would expect a narrator of the movie. I can't even off the top of my head remember which of like the four boys he is.
I don't think we know.
Do we know?
Right.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I mean, like there might be a moment where it's like, he's like, when she told me this or whatever, I don't know, but like he's literally credited as a narrator, and it's just so I think that's part of exactly what you're saying, Alex. It's like we're just sort of looking at this world from these different perspectives without being like, and then here's what this character, like, we're going to go see what his relationship with his dad's like. And then he's going to go ride his bike to the store. It's not that kind of movie. It's just a movie about like, we are all kind of looking inward at this thing. And then there's also the interesting thing of the, what happened of it all, where, 1999, we also had American Beauty, where we are hearing the movie from the POV of, a narrator who it does not survive the events of the movie, which obviously you could do here, I guess. But there's the question in my mind going, okay, well, I know what the title of the movie is, but that doesn't mean I know exactly what's going to happen and how everything's going to shake out. But telling it from someone else's perspective means that I don't really get any clues, and the only clues I get are them saying like, oh, we tried to piece together what happened and everything. But I think there's something compelling about that too.
Definitely. And I just really quickly as an aside, I think telling your audience how a movie's going to end up top is a really interesting, like dramatic construction or idea, right? Shakespeare did it really well, but like there are many other people who have essentially done that, and then that becomes kind of the dramatic question, which carries us through the events of the plot, even when they seem unconnected, where it's like all of this is somehow going to add up to like how and why, and some kind of conclusion in terms of plot, while we're just sort of being strung along through these episodic things. But Michael, you're pointing out all of the different POV characters and angles that we have on the story. And to me, all of that is thematic. So like I never really sat down and tried to do a thematic read on this movie at any other point that I've watched it. I've just sort of let it wash over me and absorbed it. But this time around, I was like, I'm going to have to explain this on a podcast. And to be clear, I don't think this is like the cleanest thematic read of all time, but I just feel like there's so much of this voyeurism almost, or like objectification that's happening of the girls, the Lisbon girls, from the narrators, from the neighbors, as you're pointing out, from the news people, as you're pointing out, and even from Trip Fontaine, right? Like he basically just is obsessed with Lux Lisbon in the same way that kind of everybody else is. And he like has more guts than most and wants to like get closer to her than anybody else ever has. But it's not like he sees her more completely than anybody else does. And we definitely, like, the film is really clear about that, where that storyline resolves. But it's not just the objectification of observing, but the objectification of using these girls for your own personal, whatever you want to use them for, right? So like whether that's to get people to watch your news clip, or that's to, in the case of Lux and Trip Fontaine, that's like sexual satisfaction on his part. It's just a conquest for him, right? Like she's the one girl who won't give him the time of day, and then she's the one girl he wants, and then immediately uses and immediately discards. And then for the boys, it's just this fantasy that they have. I think it's really interesting that the opening the title montage of the movie has that shot of Kirsten Dunst, Lux, like in the clouds, looking directly into camera, kind of flirting with the camera. It's again this fantasy that the neighborhood boys are projecting onto her. And I think it's really fascinating that, first of all, objectification is something that women live with every day, all the time, and even very, very, very young women, perhaps especially very young women, you are learning in adolescence that the world is going to objectify you. Very quickly, that happens to young women. And it doesn't matter what the purpose is, right? Like to young women who are being objectified and used, it's kind of all the same no matter what the intentions are, right? Like Trip Fontaine didn't know what his intentions were. He didn't realize, like, he thought his intentions were honorable. He said that out loud to her dad. But when we see him as older, he's like, I really, really liked her. But then it was different, right? It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real. And then I realized, oh, I can't be real with this idea of a thing that I made up in my mind. And the neighborhood boys are no better. It doesn't matter to the Lisbon girls. I mean, first of all, the neighborhood boys are watching them through a telescope. So that's... But also, it doesn't matter to the Lisbon girls. They're no different than Trip Fontaine or the news reporter or the gossipy neighbors, right? They're being used all the same. They're not actually being known and engaged with as being real people. they're just being reduced to this flattened idea of a thing. And I think all of that really comes together. You know, the film, I think, is actually crystal clear about that's sort of the stuff of fascination. And it puts us in the position as audience members as having to grapple with that as well. Like, are we also obsessed and fascinated with the Lisbon girls? If so, why? And what does that say about us? By making the POV characters, you know, these neighborhood boys and these neighbors and all these other people, it's really interesting. Even in the last, like, you know, 30 seconds of the movie, we hear a voiceover from their mother, as though she's being interviewed down the line. And she says something like, none of the girls ever lacked for love in my house. And she's just kind of processing it herself down the line. But there's all of this sense of, all of the objectification is essentially the same at the end of the day in terms of the dehumanizing that it does of the subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that helped me start to parse the sort of metaphor and theme of it all was, as you just said, looking at it through the different lenses of the different characters, right? So if Trip is going, I was obsessed with this thing, and then once I got it, I didn't care anymore, then like that's his sort of thing. Like that's sort of the broader, how can we look at our own lives through that, and do we do that ourselves, right? And then through the boys, you know, and it's an interesting gender thing going on here too, because I like the guy in me is going like, oh yeah, I know what it's like to be those boys obsessed with those girls, right? So it's like, rather than just having everything through the girls' POV, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a whole different experience over across the street than what the Lisbon girls are having in their lives. And for them, it's like, you know, that sort of nostalgia thing that you feel where you're like, oh man, remember that summer where we did this thing but then this thing happened and we never understood it, or like we never saw that person again or whatever, right? So there's that sort of, I think, as we talked about earlier, like the way that we remember things and how we obsess over things, and if something doesn't make sense, then we're not okay with that. So then that's its whole kind of thematic package almost. And then of course we had the Lisbon girls, where I think, you know, this is a movie where the reason I keep saying metaphor is because, like, this isn't just a movie about 5 girls who end their lives. This movie is about their experiences and what they went through during this time in their life, right? And it's like the metaphorical loss of innocence, I think, is the major thing that's happening here. You know, so you have these girls, and then you have obviously Lux as the central character who, on or around the midpoint, you know, obviously she has her situation with Trip, and then it's just guys on the roof, and then it's, you know, like that's it. There's nothing left. And of course there's the symbol of the tree, this thing that was alive growing in their yard that is now dying, and they are trying desperately to protect it, right? So you have that whole thematic thing going on. So I'm still processing it all, but I love being able to kind of like put everything in these little packages based on each of the POVs and start to kind of sort through what is being said with each of those.
I think another interesting piece of that thematic puzzle is the party scene that leads into Cecilia's suicide. And Trisha, off mic, you were mentioning something interesting about that scene, which is there's a character with Down syndrome, and there's this whole moment that actually leads to Cecilia like leaving the party and going upstairs. So I'm curious, your thoughts on the meaning of that scene and how it plugs in thematically to everything else.
Oh, I mean, I think, you know, you have a character there with a disability, and he's welcomed enthusiastically by everybody. That character's name is Joe. But, you know, ultimately they're just using him also, right, for entertainment.
Right. For their own amusement.
Right, for their own amusement, right? They're not welcoming him sincerely. They don't really know him or care to get to know him. They just, you know, are like, oh, sing your song, do a trick, basically, like entertain us. You can see that that's kind of as you mentioned, the tipping point for Cecilia to go upstairs, and then that leads directly into her choice to go out the window. And it is just this, I think, really clear parallel, right, where Cecilia feels like she's not being known and used. I think the line that she says to the doctor is really interesting, where he's like, "You're too young to even know how bad life gets," and she's like, "Obviously, doctor, you've never been a 13-year-old girl."
Right. Iconic line. That's so
incredible. Good. But yeah, it's very much this sense of like, they are not known. They don't feel known by anybody but themselves, which I think is really interesting. We do have some scenes of them as a unit, right? The 5 sisters. But it's so fascinating, as someone with a sister myself, like, I find that when women are in groups alone together, we're talking constantly. And the scenes where we get these girls, they're just like almost not even talking to each other, right? Like almost always when we see a scene of them, they're just kind of like languishing in their room or like sort of almost wordlessly communicating. They're just kind of being their own thing in a certain way. And that contributes to this feeling of unknowability about them, or like them being unknown. And yeah, I feel like there's just several examples. Like there are probably lots of other small examples very similar to that, where the filmmaker is drawing parallels between people who being used by other people, right?
Yeah, like that whole party scene was really like struck me and was really interesting because on one hand it was sort of portraying the awkwardness of like that time,
the universal
right?
awkwardness,
right?
So accurate,
yeah, right? Yeah. And so like that was I have trouble watching movies about people this age because clearly I have some baggage back there, but so like that was really like painful but honest and raw and brought you into it. But yeah, they're awkward that whole time until the Joe character comes, and then almost like that's when the party comes alive. It's like, oh, like you were saying, Trisha, like it's almost like there's entertainment here for us now. And how like watching that happen, understanding like, and I don't think anyone in that room was trying to be evil, like kind of to your point earlier, Alex, there's this sort of objectivity that I feel like it's treated with, but also seeing what I think the Cecilia character is saying is like, as you're saying, Trisha, use like people using people for their own reasons or whatever it is. And yeah, it was striking that that's the moment that she gets up, because it does speak to this kind of crazy wisdom that one would have at 13 that does still feel very honest. And I think one of the lines toward the end when the boys are reading through the journals, there's some line about like, you know, the girls saw us like completely and knew everything about us and we knew nothing.
We couldn't fathom them at all.
Right. Like I feel like that is also very true of people of that age and the different genders, at least like from my experience. So yeah, there's just, I don't know, that was the breaking point, for lack of a better word, for Cecilia. Did feel like it spoke like volumes about the psychology of this person that, again, we don't have windows into except these like tiny little moments, and often from the outside. So yeah, that scene like really stuck with me.
Well, I just think it's very telling that the next time we go into that basement room is at the very end, where another one of the girls has chosen to end their life in that room. Like they could, you know, in theory, they could all have like been together in the bedroom and all taken the sleeping pills or something. But the fact that they kind of like choose different places that are meaningful in different ways, or like symbolic in different ways to them, I just think is really interesting. And you can see when the boys are sneaking down the stairs, right? It's kind of a bookend or a callback to that party scene where they all troop down the stairs together and they're like, here we are for this party. They're sneaking down there later, like, oh, we're going to go into the basement. And then, of course, what they find is that another one of the Lisbon girls has chosen to end her life there.
Yeah, it looks like the remnants of the party are still there, right? So like
feels
it's
that
very
way,
quickly reconnect that, and so that's also like the parent characters are really interesting in all of this too, because it doesn't feel, again, it wasn't like immediately clear, they didn't plug in thematically like a single peg, but it felt like in all these multifaceted ways they were touching like all of this like thematic stuff in terms of like, what are the parents using them for? It feels like lots of different things, trying to control, like you're saying, the mother at the end saying that they didn't want for love, there's so much love, but like how is that being expressed? The record burning scene also like stuck with me of like it. I think with like the setup also of like the parents had just come from like a particularly like heated sermon or something, and so it was like time to burn all the like rock and roll records, and that felt like a very clear vignette of like, the parents, the mother in particular in that scene, feeling like having to perform like what a good parent is onto the child when the child is like begging to like listen to me, like these are things that are important to me, and rather than connecting, you're using your position of power and behaving in a way that you feel is right. So that was just another, I feel like there are a lot of instances of really interesting disconnection with the parents and the children that seems really important, but also seems to have lots of different shades to it.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think it's fascinating that this movie is not about religion, right? Like, ostensibly, like we see the mother character wearing that like cross necklace, and like we sort of understand that there is some kind of religious framework around the strictness in the household, but that's like so not what this movie is about in any way. It's not about like, no one's ever like, God is judging you for this, or like you have to do this because of the Bible. Absolutely, that's not ever mentioned. It's just these are the rules of the house, right? So the parent characters essentially become their own kind of authority, like just sort of another element of control, rather than actually being, I don't know. It's interesting how it keeps the theme like razor focused on this like objectification and people, using other people, by not making it about anything larger than that. It stays focused on like the humanness of the way that these characters are harming each other.
And there's a dimensionality to all the characters, like including the parents, where this movie could just be the parents being oppressive and awful the entire time, but they're kind of not for the first like maybe third-ish, half-ish, where they're just like, they're kind of normal. Like the dad's like yucking it up with the guys about his thing that he made or whatever. Like, wars, all of his war trivia that he wants to share.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, oh, we have these rules, but then it's almost not until the girls start to become a little more rebellious that then the parents clamp down. And that's not to say the parents are like fine, actually, as much as it's to say this movie is not interested in putting everyone into a one-dimensional box just to sort of show you what their archetype is, including Trip, like we talked about. He feels like a sort of complicated character and not just what you expect the character to be as soon as you see that opening, needle drop moment with him, right? You're like, oh, it's this guy. It's like, oh, no, he's a little more complicated than that. And I think that's part of the sort of mystery of it all is people aren't just whoever you think they are many things.
Yeah. And I love the counter programming casting of Kathleen Turner in the role of the mom. Like, so one of the sexiest women ever, who, her career is sort of made on erotic thrillers and like very sexy movies, basically. And she's got the full figure, and she's got the the deep voice, and it's just really interesting that they cast her in this, because I think there's this sense of, I read a review where it kind of talked about her as being like afraid of her own sexuality, and by casting somebody like Kathleen Turner with the reputation and career that she has had, it's really amazing to see the way that she becomes this like uptight person in the role. And I think it works tremendously well, right? Like, she's not dowdy as a human being, but the way that they make her look scared of her own like self or her own desires, and scared for her daughters too. The scene where she's like interviewing all the boys before they take them out for homecoming. I don't know. She's just amazing, where she's like, who's driving and what are you doing? And there's like a hesitation or just like a fear that's the undercurrent of all of her, crackdowns and like authority figures. She's even the scene where she's burning the records. You feel like she might not go through with it, right? She's kind of like afraid of the whole thing or doesn't want to be doing any of it. But she just, in a way, in her own way, also feels like stuck.
That's actually just one of the things I really like about that scene, is that she like sort of fails. We're like, then there's all the smoke and she has to open the door and she,
we'll burn them later. I'll throw them away.
Right.
In theory, I want to burn these to make a statement, but it's not practical.
No.
Right.
Yeah. I just love that kind of, that three-dimensionality that then comes across from her, kind of like you were saying, Brian.
Right. Yeah. Like, because as you were talking, Trish, I was picturing like Amy Poehler in Mean Girls, right? Where it's like, oh, the mom, like the daughter became like a carbon copy of the mom. The mom is like, this is how, the women in this family are. And like, we have to live like this way. And I'm going to mold you into this thing. And like, these 5 girls are all sort of very similar in look and that kind of thing. And then the mom, as you're pointing out, is very different, right? So it makes this interesting counterpoint with the girls, rather than they're all just like micro versions of their mom.
And all this, this really does fit perfectly in with theme, because in a lot of ways, a protective parent like this is objectifying and flattening their children. Like their children are denied three-dimensionality. They are just young women. And in her mind, young women have to be protected at all costs from everything, including music, including boys, including whatever. And that's a flattening of her children into this like this object of young woman that has all these kind of like rules attached to it.
And I think it's interesting, the number of characters in scripts, like, and in movies, we try to keep them down, right? Because you want each character to have like their own personality and whatever. But the fact that there are 5 Lisbon girls at the beginning, it's too many. And like, I genuinely have seen this movie many times and kind of can't keep track of, some of those older ones. Cecilia and Lux are the 2 youngest. And then the 3 oldest are all just kind of this like one person in my mind.
And the fact that they're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, it's like there's not even enough age difference for you to be like, oh, that's the,
Yeah. It's exactly the point that you're making, Alex, which is just that like in our mind and in the mind of the narrators, they're just the Lisbon girls and they're all sort of this like faceless thing. And they don't get to have like uniqueness. They don't get to have their own dreams, their own like hopes and goals and the things that we normally associate with dimensionality in film and in real life as we get to know people.
Yeah. Well, and so maybe we can like pivot to lessons here and also kind of the lesson that I've been thinking about is ever since you mentioned the details thing, Trisha, I've been like, like details are really important. And there's lots of different kinds of details, right? You can be a Fincher that's like, this camera needs to be like 2 pixels to the right because we need that detail. Or there's the detail, as you were describing, of like, what is the subjective experience of this character and what things can I focus on to recreate that subjective experience? And I've been kind of thinking about that, and I feel like Sofia Coppola, at least in the 2 entries of hers that I know the best, which is this, because I just saw it, and then Lost in Translation, there is a focus, I think, more on conveying the subjective experience of what's going on than there is like the plot or like, I'm going to tell you a story in a more, A to B to C to D conception of what a story is. And I guess I'm just curious to hear your guys' thoughts about that, because I feel like it's starting to put kind of a mental model around this ineffable Sofia Coppola-ness that's been in my brain that I'm now kind of, I don't know, it's a way for me to like be able to handle it more and appreciate it more specifically of like, this film is about these things in this experience. It's not about, you know, the normal 3-act structure, plot, etc. things. You can use the language of film to do lots of things and create a lot of different emotional experiences for your audience. And I feel like there is something in this, in Lost in Translation, that is like wholly unique and using film in a really unique way that's, I don't know, that's really special.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, this film has a structure, right? Brian hinted at it earlier. The Trip Fontaine character kind of creates the structure of the second act. Right. And like, so, you know, just when you think, whenever there's like this, we feel lost, there's not a dramatic question, something else comes in, right? Like the elm tree is like a plot thread as like sort of a B plot. The Trip Fontaine character comes in as kind of like this B plot. For the whole first act, the Cecilia thing is just this huge dramatic question hanging over it, because it's like, it starts with Cecilia was the first to go, but then she doesn't go. She's there. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes like, what is going to happen? So there is structure to this. I didn't like pause it this time around, but yeah, I bet you'd find that the Trip Fontaine encounter like at Homecoming happens right at the midpoint, I would say. Or actually, do you think it's the crisis? Now I don't know.
Yeah, it's very like I almost paused, but I kind of didn't want to, like, because I felt like it didn't matter in this movie in a way that I think it's
the midpoint, because after that, Lux starts like messing around with boys on the roof,
right? And
then there's still a while before it goes into like total lockdown, and then they start like listening to records and things with the girls on the phone. If I had to guess.
Yeah, I think it's probably a late midpoint.
It's a late midpoint.
Because I do feel like after that, after he leaves her in that horrific way on the field, then sets everything going toward the back half. But I think it is shorter. And yeah, so there's absolutely structure. And like you mentioned at the beginning, there's the dramatic question framing everything, which is we know these characters are going to die at some point, how, when, etc., keeps us engaged, keeps us caring about the events of the plot as well. Cool. Okay, other lessons we're taking away from Virgin Suicides. Brian.
Yeah, I mean, a little with what you were talking about, I was thinking about this sort of slice of life movie, and how this is one and how it isn't one, and that kind of thing. I remember my friend who I watched a lot of movies with when we were kind of in our teens and 20s, he referred to the slice of life movies usually as something he tended not to like. And that maybe got into my DNA a little bit, where I was having a hard time getting into them. And just to kind of define what I'm talking about, it's these, the Virgin Suicides, Dazed and Confused are a couple examples of just like movies where there's not often like a traditional plot or strong dramatic, but like in that way where we're just like, this thing happened to this person and then they went on this crazy journey and there was a car chase and whatever, right? Like the sort of what we think of is just like, that's what a movie is. And, it's erroneous for us to think of as that's what a movie is, but that's sort of how we have been raised a lot of the time. And then obviously there's this sort of gritty, lo-fi documentary kind of feel like we talked about, and you're just kind of watching people exist for a while. And I was thinking like when either it's not done well, or maybe it is done well, it's just not working for me, is when at the end I'm kind of going, what was that for? Like, why did I do that? Right? I wasn't necessarily super entertained, and now it's over and I don't know what to take away from that. And again, some of that is when it's not done well, but some of it is, I think, us becoming better as an audience at subtlety and theme and character arcs that maybe aren't screaming in your face, right? Like there is that kind of stuff. I think I was thinking about Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always as a movie I probably would not have appreciated at all when I was in my early 20s, and like loved like crazy when I saw it, kind of being able to really sink my teeth into what is really going on in that movie. So then back to Virgin Suicides, I was thinking, how does this movie not get bogged down in the slice of lifey kind of feel of it all? Because we do spend that sort of second act that you're identifying. It is just a lot of like, here's some people and like they like each other and they're doing some stuff. But of course, we have this provocative opening and title, and we are shown the dynamite under the table at the beginning. So I'm spending this movie leaning in, going, oh, I'm not just watching two people flirt. I'm going, is this part of what's going to happen? Is this like what, like tracking everything, And as I mentioned earlier, we have this like the voiceovers by the narrator, this sort of undercurrent of like, we're still trying to piece it together and we never really quite understood. So I'm like, ooh, what's going on here? So that's obviously like a huge macro thing that this movie is doing, to just be like, everything that you're seeing is imbued with meaning. Even if maybe you could take this scene out or that scene out, you as the audience member are looking for meaning in every little interaction, right? And I think that's really cool. And then there's just smaller things throughout that I think just gives this movie like a kind of life that I'm missing a lot of times from these more slice of lifey movies, where I just feel like I'm just watching a camera on a wall. Like, why are we doing this? Where, there is the sort of will they, won't they? There's the girls kind of getting into trouble, the rebellion. So there's this kind of boiling under. The movie's kind of weirdly funny in a lot of ways. It's like darkly comedic in a way that's enjoyable. It's like, oh, I'm allowed to laugh at that. Okay, like that, because I didn't know if I could, but you told me I could. So like that kind of gives me like a release a little bit. So this movie doesn't just feel dour the entire time. And then of course, as we identified right at the top, just these dream montages and this mood hanging over everything, that I just feel like if Sofia Coppola had just leaned into, I'm going to purely go for the, cinema verite thing, then we wouldn't feel this movie in the way that like she just makes us feel this movie. And I think there's a lot going on there where it's sort of this slice of life movie embedded in this poem of a package, that just sort of, I think, works really well.
Yeah.
Just like some of the color, like in the house, the longer the girls are kind of confined there, the more just like starkly green and blue, and it's really, it's not that slice of life kind of like I've complained about sometimes, where it's, it's like the Sundance Darling picture where it's like everything kind of looks very plain and very boring, and it's like so slice of life. This is like dripping with like color and style, even as it has this kind of very realistic slice of life feeling to it.
Yeah, I love the mini montage where people are being haunted by Cecilia, like where two different of the boys are like, they see her, and then her dad also sees her, right? It's a crazy choice just to have that as like sort of a part of the texture of the movie, but it goes a long way towards that dreamlike, really vivid, evocative feeling.
Yeah, very much so. I feel like there's like a thing on the tip of my tongue that I still haven't been able to like get to. So I'll think about it some more as we listen to Trisha's lesson. Trisha, what's your lesson?
Yeah, speaking of all of this, the scene that I was struck by this time was the second to last one, kind of, where they're talking about how the neighborhood, like, there's this spill at the chemical plant, and then like everything is toxic, and the elm trees are all dying, right? We see the condemned trees all along the sides of the street, and then they're talking about the debutante balls and how the whole atmosphere smells bad, and then all this stuff. And it's interesting, you mentioned the color, Alex, where it kind of comes this again, the narrators, this is after the Lisbon girls have all died. So the narrators are looking back on this time in this place, and they are the ones who are associating this atmosphere of death and the other things that were changing in their lives with the death of the Lisbon girls, right? There's this extrapolation of, we had this feeling that something had died, and then literally that seemed to manifest around us, or we saw that manifesting around us in these unrelated events. But to them, they're these deeply related events, right? Where these other things have happened. And so now they're wrapped up together in the minds of the narrators with the death of the Lisbon girls. And, that party's really interesting. Everyone's wearing their gas masks. The color's like so green and everything. And again, it just goes back to that, like, our impressions of the way that things are. It's so novel-like. I assume it must be straight out of the novel, right? But our impressions of the way that things are the ways that we connect events. And I just think this movie does that all over the place. Like, that's probably the biggest example. But there's so many examples of the way that the movie makes connections between these events. And, again, the narrators are looking for clues. I will say one thing. So just want to set that lesson over there, which is like, if you're wanting to create this sort of like impressionistic, sort of like, painting or poetry like thing for your film, making sure that the atmospheric events or the things that we tend to associate with like, metaphor are wrapped up in there. But setting that lesson aside, I also do love the choice to keep us in the POV of those narrators, because again, as audience members, that's where we need to find ourselves. This reminds me of our conversation about Killers of the Flower Moon, and where the filmmaker wants us as audience members to identify. They don't want us to identify with the Lisbon girls. They want to make sure that we know that we are these neighborhood boys. And that, these neighborhood boys see themselves as being like good guys, right? Their fantasies about the Lisbon girls are not explicitly sexual, but they are certainly fantasies. And, the scene right before they go to like pick up Lux and the girls, what they think, they're like, oh, we're going to escape to Europe. Here's all these photographs in our minds of like us having a good time. We're all free. We're all like enjoying ourselves. Again, those are for being created for their own like pleasure, for their own enjoyment, this inner life that they've cultivated about their relationship, their non-existent relationship with the Lisbon girls, to be honest, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's really telling that these are the people that the Lisbon girls choose to witness their deaths, right? They bring them there specifically to witness their deaths. Like Lux goes and chooses to end her life literally after talking to them. And some of the timing of the other girls happens while they are in the house. So the message there from the Lisbon girls is also and from the filmmaker is also very clear, right? That just because you see yourself as being like the good guys does not mean you are the good guys in this scenario. Your objectification is no different than anybody else's that is being placed on their lives. And I think that that's also incredibly fascinating. And again, she's so good, Sofia Coppola.
Even thinking about that, that kind of epilogue debutante ball party scene, there's this extended moment of the kind of like rich dad doing a toast to the daughter who's like the object of the room, exactly. Of like, she's going to this very nice school and like, look at her. So this interesting theme carries on even into that last part of just the young women as these objects for the community to look at. The debutante ball
is literally toxic.
Yeah, right. Literally gas masks.
We get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. And Alex, what about you?
Just think about narration, and this movie came out in 1999, and it has kind of a feeling of course, we already mentioned American Beauty, and also think about some Wes Anderson movies. Just this feeling where, you know, we're also taught in the like screenwriting 101 books that, you know, narration's a crutch, you know, narration is lazy. You got to show, don't tell. But I think filmmakers like Sofia Coppola and movies like this, narration is doing something different than like crutch support, because you can't tell your story otherwise. There's something that's poignant about pairing like a perspective looking back in time, like kind of talking from a perspective that is that doesn't understand the interiors and just is like looking at something and talking about it from a distance, it's not doing plot work even really at that point. It's doing something else. And I think thinking about the different things narration can do besides fill a gap in your plot because you couldn't figure out how to show, don't tell. And I think this is an example of a movie where narration is doing something different than plot gap filling. And like Wes Anderson movies, I think when the narration feels really poignant, there is this synergy between a statement being made by the usually kind of omniscient narrator and an image on screen. And there's a pairing of those images that is not about plot anymore. It's about the pairing and the emotion of the pairing. And so I think, I love narration in movies when it's not doing plot work, but doing emotional work. And this is a great example of that.
Yeah.
And I think anytime the narration is told from decades later, whether it's this or Stand By Me or Christmas Story or Wonder Years, like the Wonder Years, it's just
Wonder
like,
Years, totally.
Yeah, it's like it almost automatically is imbued with emotion because it's a character remembering another time in their life, and often that gets built into the narration where they are being like, oh man, I like the way that I felt that day, I've never felt like that again, or something like that. That means a lot more coming from someone who is 40 saying that than someone who I'm 11 and like, this is the most important thing to me right now. It's like to say that still was the most important thing to me. Like that has a whole different weight to it.
Yeah. That was really interesting. Time, powerful. As we talked about in the last episode. Time.
Duration.
Awesome. Well, I want to hear what you guys have been watching, but also I'm really excited that, as I said, to remind everybody, next week we'll be back with Priscilla. This is I think the one time in our October Autumn season that we're looking at a director's literally first feature film and their latest back-to-back. So I think that'll be really fun to compare and contrast.
And we're all going together. I'm excited.
Yeah. But in the meantime, what else have you guys been watching? Brian, what have you been watching recently?
So for quite a while, my partner and I have been talking about doing this double feature, and we just, for some reason, hadn't gotten around to it. And we finally did the babysitting double feature, which is Adventures in Babysitting.
And Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. I knew it.
Correct.
Nice.
Not The Babysitter. And I loved both these movies when I was a kid and just hadn't seen them in quite a while. And Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. It's fine. It's fun. It's like definitely that early 90s type thing with just insane plot stuff where you're like, I guess, sure, like the movie can just tell me that happened and it's fine. Both these movies are pretty insane, but Don't Tell Mom especially is a little bit more. But man, Adventures in Babysitting it makes me so happy. I watched this a ton as a kid. It's just so much fun. It's Chris Columbus's first movie.
Nice.
And like he just already had this flair for just like antics, like fun, energetic antics. Something that's amazing is so amazing, like just the big, like whether it's Goonies or Harry Potter, just like step into a room and it's like the most incredible room anyone's ever seen. And he like makes you feel that. And it's got Elizabeth Shue and Anthony Rapp and Bradley Whitford, and Vincent D'Onofrio plays maybe Thor in it, ? It's the movie makes it unclear. And then Keith Coogan is in both movies, and he's really clean cut in Adventures in Babysitting. And then he's a total like long-haired stoner metal kid in Don't Tell Mom. And at the end of the movie, he gets a haircut and he cleans up. And like 11-year-old me in the theater was like, oh, it's Brad from Adventures in Babysitting. And I feel like that was like the first time in my life I can remember like recognizing like an actor. Like, oh, you were in a different thing that I saw, but now I can tell because you look the same that you were that other person. So one of the other many reasons that movie has a fondness in my heart. So yeah, Adventures in Babysitting, classic, holds up. It's on Disney Plus, but if you want to watch it in all its original late 80s PG-13, couldn't say some of the stuff today, glory, then I'd recommend watching it somewhere else because there's, PG-13 movies in the 80s. What are you going to do?
Well, they didn't exist in the 80s, not until like the very, very end.
I mean, this movie is currently rated PG-13. Maybe it wasn't at the time, but
It would have been PG at the time.
Yeah.
They retroactively.
But let's just say if you're watching it on Disney Plus, you're not watching the original movie.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The actor thing is funny because I remember seeing a trailer for Event Horizon and seeing Sam Neill as not Alan Grant as a kid, and I like my brain broke.
Oh, yeah.
This was me with Hunt for Red October. I was like, whoa. This is also Sam Neill.
Right. He's only Alan Grant.
Yes.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's kind of weird that we let or want actors to play multiple roles
Right?
in different movies. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes I just think about just like the form of like film, also just like that there's music playing in film. Like, I'm watching a thing and
Constantly.
somebody's just like an orchestra is just playing music while stuff is happening. That's weird. Cool. Okay. Babysitter Duo. Trisha, what have you been watching?
Speaking of Wes Anderson, which Alex was a minute ago, I saw the new Wes Anderson short films that have just been released on Netflix that are all adaptations of Roald Dahl short stories. The longest one is called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, and it stars Benedict Cumberbatch and Ben Kingsley and Ray Fiennes, Richard Ayoade, and Dev Patel, and all men that I love. And it's just like, it's great. Like, that one is, I would say, probably the most like triumphant, watchable, really fun. It's like 40 minutes long. It zips past. It's great. Like, is it Wes Anderson's masterpiece? I don't know. Maybe. There's something about Wes Anderson and Roald Dahl that is just like a mind meld, I think, where they just belong together. Like, I love Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Same.
But the Wes Anderson shorts are just really great. So Henry Sugar is amazing. If you can only watch one, watch that one. But then the other three, he did an adaptation of Poison and one of The Swan and then one of The Ratcatcher. And it's clear that like he made all these movies at the same time. They have basically the same cast, like overlapping casts in all of them. But they're so great. Like, there's clearly budget things happening where there's just a ton of stuff he can't afford to do, but he has the greatest like actors imaginable in the text of a Roald Dahl short story. A lot of people aren't as familiar with Roald Dahl's short fiction, and not all of it is for kids. I would say actually most of it is not for kids, although I used to teach it in some of my upper level English classes. But they're always sort of these like fraught narratives with like twisty, sometimes magical things, but just really unexpected. I think at the end of the day, you're going to get something that's not what you expect from Roald Dahl. And Wes Anderson brings all the whimsy to it, but also all of the like just this fun story experience of like, you're just going to hear a story right now, usually because Ray Fiennes is going to play Roald Dahl and look right into camera and tell it to you, or because Benedict Cumberbatch is going to do that, or Dev Patel is going to do that, or whatever. Anyway, they're all a delight. Strong recommend from me. The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar et al. Of the new Wes Anderson shorts.
Nice. I feel like those came out of nowhere also, but maybe I don't follow these things. But I was like, wait, what? There's a new, what? So it's good to hear a glowing review of it.
Yes.
Alex, what have you been watching?
I went and saw the film Anatomy of a Fall, which won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. I think it's a French film, but it's half in French, half English, because the lead character in the film is a German woman living in France, who has to speak English to kind of like get by with everybody. But it's a really interesting courtroom drama. Basically, it's about a man falls from the upper level of a house and dies, and then the question is, did his wife kill him or not? And we are not told, the audience, what actually happened. And the whole movie is watching the lead actress, essentially, Sandra Hüller is her name. She's really great just to watch and just to think about, who is she and do we believe her? And the more the movie goes on, the more we understand about her marriage and her life and how she ended up here. And it's just, it's a really interesting movie that I would highly recommend. Anatomy of a Fall.
Nice.
Okay, cool.
Michael.
So I actually don't have a movie. I'm going to do a podcast this week.
Classic.
It's been a minute, okay?
I know. That's
Is
why
it
it's
a Malcolm
classic.
Gladwell podcast?
So no, that'll be next week. So this week, so there was an episode of the Ezra Klein Show podcast from New York Times Opinion. He had a guest on interviewing a guest. And so it's called We Need Better Narratives About Gender. And I think the subtitle is a very queer conversation about gender. And so, conversations about gender, trans rights, all these things are happening. And my struggle has been coming from a place of ignorance and not a lot of touch points within my life and my circle, like wanting to understand and like get a better like mental model of how to navigate all of this and be supportive and all these things. But my only venues being Twitter and people yelling as loud as possible on either side about whatever it is. And just having an allergy to that kind of conversation, if you can even call it that. And so listening to this episode was just like an epiphany, like breath of fresh air, where it's just like two really smart people talking in a quiet room at conversational levels about the complexity of all of it and just tackling it in a way that was extremely accessible for someone like me and provided the like entryway into all of this conversation, all these different changing ways that we're thinking about gender, how that affects trans people, how that affects cis people. Like, how do I think about gender? What is gender? What gives me my gender? There's some interesting allegories about one of the people in the conversation is like biracial and grew up in a different country, came to America and then was treated differently and kind of discovered that she was like a Black person and like that has a meaning and that was assigned to her. And so there's this thing about her that we perceive as an immutable part of your identity that she wasn't even aware of. And so there's just a lot of really interesting extrapolations about lots of things about identity, gender, all of it talked about in a really smart, accessible, nuanced way that I super duper appreciated. And so want to get the word out about because it was just really great. So we need better narratives about gender, the Ezra Klein Show episode.
I'm sorry for ragging you about podcasts. That sounds awesome.
See, you can rag me next week when I talk about Malcolm Gladwell again. Yeah.
But yeah, the Ezra Klein Show, and also there's a Vox podcast called The Gray Area. Both highly recommended. It's just like, conversations that are complex and nuanced and good. It's just like, it's such a breath. Yeah. After being in like a Twitter sphere for too much of a day, just like listening to a long form conversation between two smart people being empathetic and trying to untangle things is just really refreshing.
Nice.
Yeah. Highly recommend.
Lovely.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been a conversation about the Virgin Suicides. We'll be back next week with Priscilla and round out our Sofia Coppola auteur analysis. We're sort of in the middle of it. We did some Scorsese. We got a taste of Fincher. That'll be bookended. And then Prometheus is on the horizon. I'm excited about that. Ridley Scott of all of it. So come back next week. I want to say thank you, as always, to the patrons that make this show possible. Thank you for supporting us. If you want to support us and help us make more episodes, head to the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. That's also where you can find our patron exclusive episode on Killers of the Flower Moon. I want to say thank you to our producer, Vince Major, our editors, Donovan Bullen, Caleb Berg, Graham Harther, and Eric Schneider. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet and say hi, and we'll see you in the next episode for Priscilla.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.